Prince Kael Ardent walked through the shining halls of the Imperial Grand Chamber, his steps quiet against the polished black stone floor. The chamber was a masterpiece built by a dozen races over hundreds of years, each pillar carved with scenes of triumph, war, diplomacy, and progress. Yet today, Kael noticed none of it. His thoughts were heavy, and his heart beat just a little too fast. He was nervous, though he would never admit it. He carried the weight of his entire species, and he felt that weight more on his shoulders every time he faced the Empire's ruling council. Humans were still new to the galactic stage. Many of the Empire's older species saw them as children, loud, emotional, and untested. Some even said humans had climbed too fast, gaining territory and influence in only a few generations. Kael had heard all the jokes and whispers before. He had learned to ignore them. Today, he planned to speak for peace, reason, and cooperation. He believed there was still time to prevent war, if only the council would listen. As he entered the chamber, dozens of voices echoed through the air. Senators from different worlds argued, shouted, or spoke passionately, while floating holographic displays hovered in the center of the room. The air shimmered with translated words, screens, speech patterns, and radiant lights from alien implants. Many species preferred louder politics, believing strong voices meant strong leadership. Kael had always been different. He preferred careful words, selected thoughts, and diplomacy. His tutors used to say that made him thoughtful. Most other nobles believed it made him weak. When the Chancellor announced his name, the entire chamber paused. Kael walked to the center platform. He felt hundreds of alien eyes and scanners upon him. His pulse sped up again, but he kept his breathing calm. He had practiced his speech for days. He knew every sentence, every pause, every emphasis. He took a moment, gathered his courage, and began to speak. "Honored members of the council," he said softly but clearly, "I stand here today not only as a prince of humanity, but as one who deeply values the peace of this empire. Tensions are rising. Misunderstandings and mistrust increase daily. If we step back, if we examine our path, we may still avoid a war that none of our people truly want." He expected silence, or at least respectful listening. Instead, the moment he finished his first sentence, several members laughed. Not loud laughter, just scoffs and snickers. A small-bodied senator with bright red skin leaned back in his seat and waved a hand as though brushing away a fly. "More human softness," he muttered. "They worry about feelings while others prepare ships." Another voice chimed in. "What do humans know of empire politics? You have been here barely 2 decades. We ruled for centuries before you were even discovered." The remarks stung, but Kael kept his tone steady. He continued, explaining that war would destroy millions of lives, create lasting resentment, and weaken the empire, just as threats from outside its borders seemed to be growing. He spoke with logic, clarity, and a genuine desire for harmony. But the louder senators interrupted again and again. Some rolled their eyes. Others muttered among themselves. Many did not even pretend to listen. Kael tried to press on, but the arguments around him grew louder than his voice. Soon the entire chamber devolved into shouting matches. Some demanded stronger military presence. Others demanded sanctions. A few, mostly younger representatives, tried to support his call for calm, but they were drowned out. One particularly large alien, covered in gleaming plated armor, slammed a heavy fist on his desk. "If the weak refuse to fight," he roared, "they must accept the rule of those who do." Kael stopped talking. His mouth remained open for a moment before he slowly closed it. No one was listening. No one cared. His carefully prepared speech, filled with facts, projections, and diplomatic approaches, meant nothing to them. They only heard volume and aggression. The chamber became a storm of raised voices, energy flashes, and angry gestures. Kael stood still, in the middle of it all, feeling very small. The Chancellor signaled for the next speaker. Kael lowered his eyes and stepped away from the center platform. A few sympathetic younger senators gave him tense nods as he passed, but even they could not hide their frustration or disappointment. Kael knew what they were thinking. Another chance lost. Another voice unheard. And if war came, they would all pay for it. Kael walked toward the exit, the noise fading behind him as the chamber doors closed. The hallway outside was calm and quiet, a welcome contrast to the chaos within. He let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. For a long moment he stood there, staring at the distant glow of the city visible through the tall crystal windows. He remembered his tutors telling him that leadership was about guiding others, not overpowering them. He believed that. He believed words could heal divides. But today those words seemed small, fragile, and useless. The council behaved like children arguing over who should own a toy. Except, the toy was entire star systems, and the children had war fleets with planet-crushing cannons. Kael knew humans were new to the Empire, but he also believed humanity had something valuable to offer. Reason, cooperation, patience, and a desire to build rather than destroy. Yet none of that had mattered today. He wondered if anything he said ever mattered. A tall, silver-skinned diplomat approached him in the hallway, Ambassador Sarun of the Viranai, one of the few species that respected humans. She bowed lightly. "You spoke well, Prince Kael," she said gently. "They may not show it, but some are listening." Kael gave a tired smile. "Some is not enough. The war advocates grow stronger every day." End quote. Sarune placed a hand over her heart. The Empire was built on many cultures. Not all are patient. Some see diplomacy as weakness. But true strength is not noise. It is resolve. Kael appreciated her support, but he couldn't hide the doubt in his voice. Then why does the council reward the loudest voices instead of the wisest? Saruni smiled sadly. Because many believe that if they do not shout, they will not be heard. Kael looked back toward the chamber doors. The muffled sound of argument still leaked through. He realized that shouting seemed to be the only language many leaders understood. "Maybe I need to speak louder," he said softly. Sarun shook her head. "No. If you shout with them, your voice becomes lost among theirs. The Empire does not need another loud leader. It needs one that stands when others fall apart." Kael said nothing. Her words made sense, but they did not ease the ache he felt. He bowed respectfully, then continued down the corridor alone. He walked past display windows, showing banners of the many species in the Empire. Everywhere he looked, he saw symbols of power, tradition, and war. Humanity's banner, a simple blue and silver crest, looked small beside the others. He walked outside onto a balcony. The city lights shone below him in every color imaginable. Ships moved across the sky, leaving white-blue contrails. Everything looked peaceful from above. Anyone standing here could forget that entire fleets were being prepared for conflict. Kael closed his eyes. He remembered how proud his father had been when the Empire accepted humanity. He remembered his dreams of unity. Today felt like a step backward. He had done his best. He had spoken from the heart, yet he had changed nothing. As the night breeze moved across the balcony, Kael whispered to himself, "If words are not enough, then how will I make them listen?" He did not know the answer yet. But deep inside, something began to change. A quiet strength began to take shape, and the young prince started to realize that sometimes silence was not weakness. Sometimes silence was the first step before action that would speak far louder than any words could. The next day arrived with an uneasy calm. Prince Kael woke early, long before the sunlight passed through the silver curtains of his high tower suite. He had barely slept. His mind replayed the previous day again and again, the laughter, the interruptions, the feeling of speaking into a void. He wondered if he had been naive to think that logic and diplomacy could win over pride and fear. But he also knew that giving up would only prove the council right. So he dressed, straightened his dark royal uniform, and prepared for another day of struggle. Outside the palace, the capital world bustled with life. Alien citizens of every shape and size walked through shining streets. Travelers flowed in and out of the spaceports. Trade ships moved above in controlled flight lanes. To an ordinary observer, it looked like a peaceful and prosperous empire. But underneath that calm surface, tension was growing every hour. Kale stepped into a transport lift and rode down to the military communications center. He had urgent reports to read. The outer colonies near the border had spotted warships belonging to warlord Vok Daruun. More than 40 battlecruisers had moved into neutral zones, claiming they were conducting exercise drills. No one believed that excuse. When Kale arrived at the center, General Hartman, a strong and experienced human officer, greeted him with a respectful nod. Hartman had served in several conflicts before humans joined the Empire. He trusted Kale more than most. "We have new imagery from the border patrols," Hartman said, handing Kale a digital tablet. "Daruun is asking for trouble, but the council refuses to see it." Kale studied the images. The cruisers were heavily armed, built with dark metallic plates and glowing energy cores. Their formation was aggressive. They did not look like ships conducting exercises. They looked like ships preparing to strike. "Can we reinforce our defenses?" Kale asked quietly. Hartman frowned. "We could, but without council approval, it might be viewed as a hostile action." Kale walked to a large holomap showing the border systems. He stared at the blinking symbols representing colonies, fleets, and bases. Hartman came to stand beside him. "Prince Kale," the general said in a lower voice, "the danger is real. We cannot wait for the council to stop arguing. If Daruun attacks, our worlds will fall one by one." Kale nodded slowly. He knew Hartman was right, but he also knew that acting without permission carried political risks. If he ordered deployments without the council's consent, other species might see it as a sign that humans were acting too independently. That could turn potential allies into critics. He took a deep breath. "We will prepare quietly, move ships, arm defenses, and alert the colonies, but keep everything controlled and calm. No war declarations, no threats. We simply get ready." Hartman smiled slightly, impressed by Kale's resolve. "Understood, sir." Silent readiness. Kale walked out of the center knowing that this decision might define the coming days. If Daruun attacked, humanity would not be caught unprepared. And if the council demanded explanations later, Kale would stand by his actions. Later that evening, Kale attended a diplomatic reception in one of the palace's vast, domed gardens. Leaders from several species were present, wearing colorful robes, armor, or ceremonial accessories. Servers floated through the air carrying trays of food and drinks. Music played from small, floating drones. But the atmosphere was far from joyful. Kale could feel the worry in every conversation he passed. Delegates spoke in hushed tones about borders, fleets, spy reports, and rumors of secret alliances. Everyone sensed that war was close, even if the council refused to admit it. Kale spotted Ambassador Saruni, the silver-skinned diplomat who had supported him the previous day. She smiled warmly when she saw him and approached. "I hear the border reports are worsening," she said softly. Kale did not pretend otherwise. "Yes, Daruun is testing us, and soon he will strike." Saruni's bright eyes darkened. "His people value conquest. They think winning proves importance. But war is not a game. Too many will suffer. People value teamend." Kale nodded. "I am preparing defenses." Saruni studied him for a moment. That is wise. But be careful. Many council members already believe humans are moving too boldly. Kale gave her a tired half-smile. They call humans weak when we speak softly, and aggressive when we act decisively. Sarun placed a gentle hand on his arm. This is the burden of leadership. You must make the right choice, even when others do not understand. Before Kael could answer, a deep voice filled the garden. So the human prince hides behind his allies. I wondered when I would find you. Kael turned. A tall alien, with armored plating and sharp facial ridges, approached. It was Lord Skarun, one of Warlord Daruun's chief envoys. His expression was one of bold confidence, even arrogance. A few nearby diplomats stepped back, afraid to be caught in the exchange. Kael straightened his posture. I do not hide, he said calmly. If you wished to speak, you could have done so at the council. Skarun smirked. Your council is a waste of time. Leaders talk while armies wait. Warlord Daruun grows tired of your delaying tactics. Kael kept his voice level. We delay nothing. We seek peace. Skarun laughed loudly, drawing more eyes. Peace is the excuse of those who lack strength. Kael did not rise to the bait. He simply looked at the alien quietly. Skarun expected anger or a defensive explanation. Instead, he found silence. He frowned, his confidence flickering just slightly. Your silence changes nothing, Skarun snapped. Daruun will claim what he desires. We take territory by right of superiority. Kael answered without raising his voice. Then you will force the Empire to defend itself. Skarun's eyes narrowed. Do you think humans can stop us? You are a young race, wearing borrowed authority. Kael met his gaze steadily. Perhaps. But we do not boast before we act. The alien envoy's armor seemed to pulse with irritation. He clearly wanted Kael to yell, argue, or show uncertainty. Instead, Kael's calm presence undermined the confrontation. After a tense pause, Skarun spat a final warning. When our ships arrive, do not pretend to be surprised. He turned and stalked away. Several diplomats watched him leave, their faces pale. Sarune shook her head. He wanted to provoke you, she said. You denied him that victory. Kael exhaled. I do not know if that matters. It matters, she said firmly. Actions speak in silence. Sometimes, silence makes an enemy fear what is unspoken. Kael did not fully understand her words, but they stayed in his thoughts. As the night grew late, he returned to his chambers. He stood on his balcony again, watching the city below. The stars looked peaceful. But Kael knew that, somewhere beyond them, Daruun's fleets were moving. He placed both hands on the railing and thought about the future. If war came, he would have to lead not just with words, but with choices that carried heavy consequences. He hoped he had the strength to make them. He hoped humanity did too. But deep inside, a quiet conviction was forming. The galaxy had mistaken silence for weakness. Soon, they would learn that silence could be sharper than the loudest threat, especially when backed by resolve. 3 days later, the galaxy changed. At dawn, a loud alarm sounded across several human colonies near the border. Citizens woke to flashing emergency lights and urgent announcements. Orbital defense operators scrambled to their stations. Patrol ships powered their engines and moved into defensive formations. The peaceful routine of life was gone in seconds. Warlord Vok Daruun had finally moved. Multiple fleets crossed the neutral border, their dark armored ships cutting through space like blades. They sent no warning message. They issued no challenge. They simply advanced, weapons armed, and engines burning hot. Their intent was clear. Invasion. At the human Central Command Station, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. Officers moved rapidly between screens, consoles, and communication panels. Information flowed in from sensors across the border. Despite the shocking scale of the attack, they were not panicking. Prince Kael's quiet preparations had given them time. When Kael arrived in the main command room, everyone stood a little straighter. He no longer looked like the unsure young prince of the council chamber. He walked with calm purpose. His eyes sharp, his voice steady. War was here, and he was ready. General Hartman saluted. Enemy fleets confirmed at 3 border systems. They have deployed cruiser wings and carrier units. Their first target is the colony at Helios 9. Kael studied the tactical holograms projected in front of him. The enemy forces were large, much larger than what the Council believed possible. Perhaps Darwin had been gathering ships in secret for months. Kael spoke clearly. Activate the Helios defense grid. Move our reserve ships in from Sector Theta. Begin civilian evacuation protocols. Every transport we can spare should be sent to the colony. An officer nodded and carried out the orders. The tension inside the room was heavy, but the discipline was impressive. No one shouted. No one panicked. Orders were relayed in steady voices. Kael could feel the weight of the responsibility, but he did not show fear. Hartman leaned close and spoke quietly. If we don't hold the border, Darwin will strike deep into our territory. Kael nodded. We hold, whatever it takes. But even as he spoke, he knew holding the line would not be enough. The Empire needed to understand that the attack had already begun. Kael turned to the communication officer. Send a message to the Imperial Council. Inform them that human worlds are under assault. The officer hesitated. Sir, the Council is still in session. There is no guarantee they will act. See. Kael's expression hardened. We send the message anyway. Within seconds, a transmission was sent to the Council chambers. Many officers doubted the Council would respond quickly enough to make a difference. But Kael knew he had no other choice. Humanity had to defend itself, with or without support. On the other side of the galaxy, far away in the massive Senate Hall, the Council was busy arguing again. Representatives shouted over each other, trying to push their agendas. Some still insisted peace was possible. Others believed in military action but could not agree on what form it should take. The chamber was so loud that when the emergency communication signal flashed red, many did not even notice. Finally, the Chancellor struck his gavel. The noise lowered slightly. We have an emergency message from the Human Command Center, he said. A holo screen activated in the center of the chamber. Kael appeared, not in royal clothes, but in a command uniform. He looked tired but composed. Explosions and distant alarms echoed faintly behind him. He spoke simply. This is Prince Kael Ardent. Human colonies have come under attack. Warlord Darwin has crossed the border with full military force. Defensive operations are underway. We NDSC 2P. The council chamber went silent for the first time in days. No one shouted. No one laughed. The seriousness was undeniable. Kael continued. We request immediate support from coalition forces. If humanity falls alone, the rest of the Empire will be next. Then the message ended. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Representatives stared at each other in stunned disbelief. Many had thought Kael exaggerated the threat. Now they realized he had been the only one who saw the danger clearly. In the command room, Kael stood with his arms behind his back, waiting for updates. Enemy formation entering Helios orbit, an officer reported. They are deploying fighters. Kael gave the order without hesitation. Release drone screens. Prepare counterfire. I want defensive rail batteries locked on every incoming craft. Outside the colony, the battle began. Human drone ships launched in thick clouds, forming defensive walls. Turrets on the colony surface rotated upward, scanning for targets. A swarm of enemy fighters screamed toward them, dark shapes lit by red engine trails. The first volley of rail fire ripped into space. Enemy ships exploded into fragments, but more came behind them. In orbit, the human flagship Resolute moved into position. Skilled pilots and gunners worked together with quiet discipline. No one cheered kills. No one shouted threats. Their communication lines were almost unnervingly calm. Target locked. Firing. Enemy cruiser disabled. Prepare next target. The silence inside their ships was more intimidating than any war cry. Even the enemy noticed. On the bridge of one of Darun's heavy cruisers, officers watched the battle feeds with growing unease. The humans were not boasting like many younger races. They were not making open calls or sending insults. They simply fought with cold precision. One alien commander frowned. "They look calm," he said slowly. "Too calm." Another officer swallowed nervously. "They're not afraid." Back at the human command center, reports flowed rapidly. Enemy landing ships incoming. Outer batteries at 60% power. Civilians boarding transports. Kale listened, asked sharp questions, and adjusted strategies. He understood that every decision he made meant lives saved or lost. Suddenly the main screen flashed. An image of a massive enemy capital ship appeared, its size dwarfing everything else. Hartman inhaled sharply. Darun's flagship. Kale's mind focused immediately. If Darun was here in person, he planned to crush the colony quickly and make a public example. Hartman looked at Kale. "We can still retreat. Save the fleet and regroup." Kale shook his head. "If we retreat now, Darun will slaughter the colony population, and the Empire will see humans running." Hartman searched Kale's face. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Then we stand." Kale stepped forward. "Send a message to the entire fleet. No speeches. Just one sentence." The communication officer waited. Kale said, "Tell them. Hold the line." The message spread across every human ship, base, and defense grid. Pilots tightened their grips on control sticks. Gunners steadied their targeting scopes. Officers exchanged firm nods. No one needed a speech. Outside, Darun's flagship opened fire. Massive beams tore through space, shaking orbiting stations and cracking outer defenses. Human ships returned fire, smaller but fast and accurate. The battle exploded in full. In the middle of chaos, Kale stood tall, calm, and unshaken. The quiet prince, who had been ignored in the council, was now leading a defense that would decide the fate of millions. He thought of the senators who mocked him, the warlord who believed humanity weak, and the galaxy that thought volume showed strength. Now they would see something different. Now they would see humanity speak through action. The battle over Helios 9 raged without mercy. Space flashed with explosions and burning metal as human ships and Darun's war fleets clashed. Even from the surface, civilians could see the streaks of rail fire and the bright flashes of detonating fighters. Children cried in shelters, parents held their hands, and emergency workers ran through the corridors to gather the last stragglers into transport ships. Prince Kale stood in the center of the human command station, surrounded by screens showing dozens of live battle feeds. Officers called out updates as calmly as possible. Even when those updates carried terrible news. Outer defensive platforms 2 and 4 destroyed. Enemy carriers launching another fighter wave. Civilians at evac center 3 evacuated. Center 4 still boarding. General Hartman wiped sweat from his forehead but kept working. "If they break the drone screen, they'll begin landing assaults next." KL nodded. His mind worked fast. The humans had prepared, but Darun's fleet was larger and more experienced in open warfare. What humanity had was discipline, courage, technology, and a determination not to collapse under pressure. Kael looked at the tactical map. Deploy the reserve gunships to the east arc. Make them form crossfire patterns at close range. Hartman issued the order, and new icons on the screen shifted in formation. Kale knew these smaller ships would take heavy damage, but their crossfire could slow the enemy enough to buy time. Time was everything now. On the battlefield, Captain Mara Dre led one of the gunship wings. She was a veteran pilot, calm and serious. When she received the new orders, she simply said, "Acknowledge," and turned her ship toward the enemy. She gave no speech to her squadron. Their silence told everything. They understood the stakes. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting for people, hiding below, hoping they would survive until rescue arrived. The squadron burst through the debris field and fired, tearing apart several enemy fighters. But heavy cruiser cannons began returning fire. One human gunship exploded. Then another. Mara gritted her teeth but did not break. Inside the command station, Kale's eyes flickered toward the casualty reports. Every loss felt like a knife, but he could not stop to mourn. Lives depended on decisions made in seconds. Then a new alert sounded. Enemy landing craft, entering atmosphere. Hartman swore under his breath. If they land troops, the colony is lost. Kale pointed at the screen. Redirect orbital batteries to ground approach vectors. We cannot let them touch down. The ground guns adjusted quickly, firing bursts of energy upward. The atmosphere glowed with flaming trails as several landing craft were destroyed mid-descent. Still, a few made it through. Kale watched them with a sinking feeling. He knew what awaited the colony if the invaders reached its streets: mass panic, destruction, and innocent deaths. He needed to stop them. Send ground security teams to intercept, Kale ordered. An officer nodded. They're responding. Far below, armored human soldiers met the invading troops in the outer suburbs of the colony. Plasma fire lit the streets. Buildings shook. The citizens inside shelters could hear distant booms and muffled shouting. It was chaos, and yet the defenders did not lose their composure. Back on the fleet level, Darun himself watched the battle from his command throne aboard his massive flagship. His armored officers monitored tactical screens with growing frustration. The humans refused to break, one officer growled. They are continuing to reinforce, even under heavy attack. Darun leaned forward, his eyes burning with challenge. They think calmness will save them. They forget we thrive in war. He signaled the chief artillery commander. Bring the primary weapon online. His ship began charging energy. Kale's command officers noticed immediately. Enemy flagship powering a primary cannon. Hartman's face paled. If that hits the colony, the shield will not hold. Kale stared at the massive ship. His voice was steady. Target the flagship with everything. Railguns, missile banks, particle arrays. All ships that can fire will focus on Darun's cannon. Hartman blinked. That exposes our flanks. Yes, Kale answered. But if we do nothing, thousands will die. Seconds later, across human ships, the order spread. Dozens of gun batteries rotated toward the massive warship. Turrets locked onto critical systems. The first volley fired silent beams flashing across space, missiles streaking forward, kinetic slugs racing ahead at hypersonic speed. Darun's officers shouted in alarm as their shields buckled under the sudden concentrated barrage. Darun grinned, not afraid but excited. So, the humans show their teeth. Good. They are worth crushing. His flagship returned fire. A single devastating beam cut through space, blowing apart a human destroyer. Another struck a defense platform, turning it into molten fragments. But the human barrage struck again and again. The flagship shook violently. Sparks flew across its bridge. Several officers were thrown from their positions. One technician shouted, "Primary cannon cooling. Cannot fire." Darun roared, "Stabilize power. Redistribute defensive fields." Back in the command station, Kale watched the flagship flicker and strain under the damage. A blue glow around the massive ship faded in sections. "They're weakening," Hartman said. Kyle nodded but kept his voice calm. "Continue firing. Every second counts." On the streets of the colony, evacuation finally reached its final stage. The last children were carried aboard the transports. Medical personnel assisted the wounded. Transport captains closed their hull doors and began launching toward orbit, hoping they could escape with their engines undamaged. The battle in space intensified. Human ships continued hammering the flagship, but the enemy reinforcements arrived. More cruisers emerged from faster-than-light jumps, surrounding the battlefield. Hartman looked at Kale grimly. "If this continues, we'll be overwhelmed." Kale inhaled slowly. He felt the weight of the galaxy pressing on him. No help had arrived from the Council. Humanity was alone, and yet not broken. Then an officer shouted, "Incoming transmission from the Council." Kale turned sharply. The screen activated. The Chancellor appeared, surrounded by silent senators. No arguments. No interruptions. Their faces were pale with shock and realization. "Prince Kale," the Chancellor said, "your report has been confirmed. Council fleets are mobilizing. Reinforcements are en route." Hartman let out a breath he had been holding. The officers looked relieved, but Kale remained composed. "How long?" 4 hours. Kale looked back at the screens showing the intense battle. "In 4 hours, there may be nothing left to save." The Chancellor looked away, ashamed. "We will move as fast as we can." And, Prince Kale, the Council apologizes. "We did not believe you." Kale did not waste time with anger. The battlefield left no room for pride. "Send everything you have," he said simply. "Humanity holds the line until you arrive." The transmission ended. Hartman turned to Kale. 4 hours. Can we last that long?" Kale looked around at the officers. At the blinking screens. At the images of ships fighting and dying. He saw fear in some eyes, but also determination. He said quietly, "We will." Then he raised his voice just enough for the room to hear. "We hold. No matter what comes, we stand, until relief arrives." There was no cheering. There was no shouting. Just firm nods and officers pushing forward with renewed focus. Outside the windows, space continued to burn. Darun's flagship shook again as another wave of human fire smashed into its hull. Yet the warlord only laughed harder. "Good," he growled. "Let them fight. We will break them and show the galaxy. Their silence means nothing." But Kale knew better. Silence did not mean weakness. Silence meant readiness, control, resolve. And as the battle reached its peak, the young prince realized something deeper. Sometimes the quiet ones did not speak because they had nothing to say. Sometimes they stayed silent because their actions would speak for them. If you want, I can continue with part 5, 1000 words, in the same style. Prince Kael entered the Imperial Senate chamber with steady steps. The large circular hall was even grander than before. High walls curved upward into a vaulted ceiling lined with drifting holographic stars. Delegates from hundreds of civilizations sat at tiered levels around the center-speaking floor. Many of them had once mocked him for his quiet nature. Now, those same representatives sat waiting in tense silence, wondering what he would say after the decisive human victory. Kael felt his heart beating fast. But this time, it was not from fear. It was from purpose. He had learned over the past weeks that silence was not weakness. Silence was power when it came from patience and certainty. He had led his people in a moment of true danger. He had refused to shout, refused to bluster, refused to trade insults with the warlord Vok Daruun. Instead, he had worked, prepared, and spoken only when necessary. And in the end, the galaxy had seen the result. As he stepped into the center of the chamber, Tiny lights followed his path, illuminating the circle beneath his feet. There were no cheers and no hostile cries. Every representative waited, the room heavy with expectation. The High Speaker of the Senate addressed him in a clear voice. This elder alien had also once doubted him. But there was respect in his tone now. Prince Kael, ardent of humanity, the Council acknowledges your presence. We are convened to hear your report on the incident at the border and your proposals for future actions. Kael nodded once. He did not begin with a dramatic speech. He tapped his wrist console, and projection windows appeared above him, showing recorded moments of the attack. The first image showed the warlord's fleet crossing into human space. The senators watched in silence. Some flinched as enemy missiles crossed defensive lines, striking the first outer stations. A few delegates shifted uncomfortably when the human evacuation convoys began moving in perfect formation. The footage needed no aggressive narration. It spoke for itself. Kael waited for the hologram to finish, and then calmly explained what happened, step by step. He did not glorify the battle. He did not describe the war in poetic terms. He simply told the truth in clean, direct language. He spoke of the families that were evacuated without panic because preparations had already been made. He spoke of the soldiers who followed orders without emotional outbursts because they trusted their commanders. He spoke of the ships that fought in coordinated silence, trading no insults with the enemy, focusing only on the task. Some senators leaned forward, listening more closely than they ever had before. Kael could see it in their eyes. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of reality. When he finished explaining the defensive operations, he touched the console again. The next projection showed the arrival of the reserve fleet. Hundreds of vessels emerging from superlight transit filled the screen. There were audible murmurs from the alien representatives. None of them had expected humanity to act with such speed and discipline. Kael looked around the room, taking in the reactions. He realized something important in that moment. Many here were not just surprised. Some were relieved. There were species who feared the warlord. They were glad someone had stood firm without triggering chaos. He ended the holographic display and folded his hands behind him. The chamber was still as stone. For a moment, no one spoke. The High Speaker finally cleared his throat and asked, "Prince Kael, human forces were victorious. The enemy has retreated and is seeking ceasefire terms. The Council awaits your recommendation for the future." Kael breathed in slowly. Then he began to speak, not with some fiery declaration, but with simple words. He said that the galaxy did not need more threats. It did not need more speeches full of pride and insults. It needed structure and mutual defense. Humans had learned the hard way that reacting emotionally only invited more conflict. So, he proposed a new form of cooperation. Not a military alliance aimed at attacking others, but a defensive pact open to any who sought peace. Member species would share intelligence on growing threats, support one another in emergencies, and respond quickly before conflict could escalate. Some senators frowned. Some whispered among themselves. A particularly hostile delegate from another faction stood and challenged him. "Prince, how can we trust this? You speak calmly now, but how do we know humanity will not use this new organization to dominate us later?" Kael did not take offense. He did not raise his voice. He simply answered, "Because we ask for no power to command others, only the power to stand together when needed." Then he paused, letting the silence stretch. Not nervously, but deliberately. "We do not need words to prove our intentions. You saw what we did during the attack. We focused on protection, not expansion." The delegate sat down, unsure how to respond. Another representative stood. This one, from a species that had historically been distant from humans. "Your people did not brag," she said slowly. "Your soldiers did not broadcast victory cries. Even now, you do not boast. It is unusual." Kael bowed his head politely. Victory does not require noise. Strength does not need anger. We fight only when we must. And even then, we seek peace. A deep silence filled the chamber again. Delegates looked around at one another. This time the silence was different from before. There was no mocking, no arrogance, no dismissal. There was consideration. The High Speaker called for a vote. One by one, delegates cast their decisions. At first, the tally was uncertain. Then, the momentum shifted. Representatives who had hesitated began choosing in support. Finally, the vote was tallied. Overwhelming approval. The new council would be formed. Multiple species chose to join at once, tired of living under the shadow of warlords and unchecked aggression. Kale bowed again, though no one had demanded ceremony. The High Speaker looked at him thoughtfully. Prince Kyle, your leadership will be remembered. The Council invites you to serve as liaison of the new defense initiative, representing humanity. Kyle accepted with simple words. I will serve where I am able. When the session ended, representatives came to him one after another. They did not speak loudly. Some just nodded. Some quietly thanked him. Others admitted they had been wrong about him. Kyle responded kindly to each one. He did not gloat. He did not celebrate. His victory was not about proving others wrong. It was about proving that restraint and calm had value even in the harshest circumstances. Later, when he returned to the human diplomatic quarters, officers and staff greeted him with respect. His father, the ruling king, sent a message expressing pride. Kale read it with a small smile. In the past, he might have wished for louder praise. Now he did not need it. He had stepped into responsibility and acted with purpose. That was enough. That night, he stood alone on a balcony, overlooking the capital world's shining cityscape. He remembered the many times he had been silenced not by external force but by the weight of others' expectations. In those moments, he had believed his voice had no place among the powerful. But now he understood something deeper. Silence had never been the absence of strength. It had been a tool, waiting for him to learn how to wield it. He realized that silence could be sharper than any insult and more commanding than shouted threats. It could give meaning to words when they were finally spoken. It could calm a frightened people and disarm an arrogant enemy. It could change the shape of a galaxy. And so the young royal stood beneath the stars with peaceful certainty in his heart. He had spoken less, but been heard more. He had not tried to dominate others, yet he had earned their respect. Humanity had not roared, but the galaxy now listened. In the quiet night, Kale found peace in knowing that his journey had only begun, and that his greatest power had never been his voice, but the silence he chose to keep until the right moment.